to another edition of the Inside the FLX podcast. I'm Josh Dursom, and as always, we're coming to you from the FingerLakes1.com studio in Seneca Falls. September is Suicide Prevention Month, and throughout it, we've been looking at different groups and how each is impacted by suicide. This is part 4 of our suicide prevention series, and we have Brenda Black and Nancy Rose Ritter joining us to talk about families and youth. Thank you both for coming in today.
Thanks for having us.
So obviously this is a really challenging topic for everyone who's involved, everyone who has survived or has a loved one who has survived. Just talk to us a little bit about how you two got involved with this fight and this organization with the Suicide Prevention Coalition here in Seneca County, which is really looking like they're doing a lot of good work here locally.
Well, I'm Brenda Black, and I am a psychiatric social worker with Seneca County Community Counseling Center, Seneca County Mental Health. I'm a licensed master of social work. I got into this fight because 8 years ago my brother took his life, and from that point I have advocated and really kind of pushed myself into this fight of educating and suicide awareness and really kind of prevention, trying to educate others on how we can help those who are in need.
So obviously everyone has their own experience with this, and obviously it's very difficult, and we appreciate both of you coming on to talk about this and share your experience, but also talk about the family, how it impacts families, how it impacts the youth and things like that. Brenda, if you could just, or Nancy, if you could just talk to us a little bit about your experience and how you got involved with this whole thing.
I'm Nancy Rose Ritter, and I earned a graduate certificate in trauma counseling partly as a result of my brother's suicide. So Brenda and I have both lost brothers. I am extremely concerned about families, both families who may have a potential suicide or those who have actually lost a loved one, because the impact is very long-lasting, it's very deep. There's often a feeling of guilt or what could I have done that doesn't go away easily. And so the aftermath of suicide or suicide attempt can be very problematic.
Now, of course, the statistics, some people, you hear them, and I want you guys to talk a little bit about the statistics on the suicide side, because because one of the common threads I think I've heard so far is that the reporting is difficult because it isn't always reported, and attempts versus. So talk to us a little bit about what your two takes are on the statistics, what they mean, and how you think they could sort of improve in the future.
Well, I think the numbers are not as important as the fact that it's more prevalent than people want to admit or talk about. Sometimes a death is not ruled suicide when perhaps it may be. Families don't want to say that their loved one took their life. So it's really a question of sort of coming out of the shadows and not feeling humiliated or stigmatized by a suicide in the community. And because we're in a small community, it looks like our numbers are very low when actually statistically they're quite high. And suicide, especially among young people, is more and more considered a quote-unquote option, which is very distressing.
Now, among young people, bullying is one of the topics that tends to come up pretty frequently, especially in schools. So talk to us a little bit about what bullying looks like today in 2017, how it comes about, and what some of those impacts can be on young people who are going through an impressionable period of their life.
Absolutely. Bullying is definitely in our faces every day. We see it on social media, we see it on TV shows, we see it everywhere, and it's a big hot topic in news articles, and as we're growing up, we're thinking that it's okay to get picked on a little bit, and it makes us bigger, it makes us stronger, and it makes us who we are as people. But then we don't realize that it really has an impact on how we really think about ourselves, and how we view others, and how much it can affect our mental health. And bullying can start from kindergarten, pre-K, and children don't even realize that they're doing it when they're picking on another child for having, I don't know, green sneakers, or they're calling another child a name that they're being silly about, but they don't think that is hurtful to them, but when in turn that 4-year-old is internalizing that and causing them pain. When you're looking for signs of bullying, you really kind of want to look at, are there any unexplained injuries with your child? Is your child more withdrawn? Is there any lost, destroyed clothing, money, books, any kind of physical ailments that aren't really injuries, but headaches, stomach aches, feeling sick, faking illness.
Yes. Pattern changes would be one of those things.
Yep. Changes in sleeping habits, any kind of appetite changes, skipping meals, at school or at home, binge eating at home because he's not eating at school because he's having his lunch taken or his lunch money taken, or he's afraid to eat in front of other students because they're picking on him or her because of their eating, declining grades, sudden loss in friends. Your child could have 4 or 5 friends, and then suddenly they're no longer hanging out with anybody. Mm-hmm. That's concerning. Have a conversation with them. Talk to them. What's going on? Have an open dialogue. Because children don't often express what's going on in their personal lives, in their social lives outside of the home, unless you engage with them.
Also, in terms of social media, kids are very, cutting, and they'll say, well, we all talk to each other that way. We all call each other names. We all, give each other a hard time. And what they may not realize is the impact it's having on one particular young person whose self-esteem may already be low, or who is having problems at home or has other issues. So discouraging your child from using harsh language and harsh imagery is important. It's important to talk with them about how they use social media and maybe monitor their social media so they're not engaging in that kind of put down. Because it really does have an impact on other people.
Absolutely. It's so much easier to say mean things to a computer than it is to somebody's face, and they call that trolling. Mm-hmm. But cyberbullying is rampant, and we see it every day in the media, and personally I hear it at work and whatnot, of children attempting suicide or completing suicide because they have been bullied on social media. They have had pictures taken of them and released online, or people have made multiple Facebook accounts and are calling them names or whatever they're doing to put down this person online, because it's so much easier to not feel the guilt when you're not doing it face to face.
How much more difficult does the whole social media aspect make policing and staying ahead of these types of issues? Because you're not just dealing with, a kid walking down the hallway and throwing a sarcastic jab or a mean-spirited jab at another student. You're talking about something that's maybe not even done on their own personal profile, but a fake account that they've made. Doesn't that get really, really difficult to try and police and stay ahead of?
Absolutely, and that's where parents have to be vigilant and be talking with their children and educating them on the effects of what this can do to somebody else.
Right. It's not just to say don't do it, but to talk about how would you feel.
Right.
How does it impact you, and then think of someone who's got deeper problems or other issues, and how that really hurts, and to be really clear about it rather than just don't do that.
Now, I want to ask you guys about the education side, because I think that's been one of the common threads throughout this entire series is the understanding that the education needs to happen early, it needs to happen frequently, and it needs to continue right from those preschool to kindergarten, right through graduating into college.
Absolutely.
Speak to that a little bit and just what you guys think with your own personal experience, how that might benefit and how it could get better even.
In my line of work, when I am working with children, and I don't just work with children, I work with their parents also, and educating them on the dangers of social media and the dangers of video games and inappropriate video games with younger children, and how those younger children take the verbiage in those and take them back to school or the playground or their siblings or wherever they're having conversations with other children, and so it really has to start with not just educating the child, but you also have to educate the parent. And especially when you have such young children that you're starting to target. So starting with the parents, and I think it should be in the schools. The schools should be educating the parents at preschool age, and we should be educating the students in second, third, fourth, fifth grade, whatever grade that we need to start that in, and we need to come together as a community and have education that way also.
Right, and I think it also means education for adults that that suicide is more a topic among young people, and it's more sort of acceptable, so to speak, and that adults need to be aware of the warning signs, of the implications for young people and for anyone, really, because suicide cuts across all boundaries of age, class, race, and people are in desperate times. Sometimes economic concerns or social concerns or political concerns can take a person to a point where life just seems unbearable. And we may not notice how someone's going into a deep depression, or they may not be able to verbalize the depression. So it's up to us to really be vigilant and watch for signs of despair, which can be hidden. I mean, we all know stories of people who have taken their lives who seemed well-adjusted, happy, successful. It's really not about success or failure. So education in the entire community and a willingness to speak of this topic is essential.
Now, one of the things that I think was really interesting, obviously, you mentioned a lot of the warning signs and the sort of pattern changes, especially among young people. But the aftermath is something that I think a lot of people also probably a little bit curious about. Speak to the aftermath of suicide and the kind of effect that an attempt of suicide can even have on a family as a whole, whether it be successful or not.
Mm-hmm. Attempted suicide is traumatic for the family, and it doesn't go away. The feelings of suicide, while they're very short-lived at the time, often come back to the person. So the family then is in this situation of having to watch for a loved one, being afraid for them, wanting to monitor their every movement and yet can't. And also some families may go, well, that's past, they've moved on, which may indeed be the case, but may not. So attempted suicide is very difficult on a family, and then a completed suicide is devastating. It's truly devastating. My brother took his life in 1989. That was quite some time ago. He was about to turn 40. And the family still is reeling in its way from that loss. Now, I attended an after-suicide support group for quite some time and found it really meaningful and powerful because I saw people in that group who had lost someone 20 years prior and came into the group fresh every time, needing a place to feel safe enough and supported enough to talk. So it's really a hard loss because, as I said before, those feelings of what could we have done? Why didn't we notice this? What does that make me? And so it's an ongoing process of recovery.
And those feelings of guilt, because sometimes you feel angry at the person, and understanding that's normal. That's a normal reaction to have when somebody has completed suicide. That it's a normal grieving process to have the anger, but on top of that, you also feel guilty because you know that they were in such despair that they could no longer go on, and so wrestling with those mixed feelings and understanding and coming to terms with those is very, very difficult for families and individuals.
Now, what kind of resources exist for not just the actual individual experiencing that level of despair, but also the families who are obviously going through something really traumatic also?
Well, unfortunately, there has not been much in the county or even in the surrounding counties because we're such small communities. And people are often hesitant to talk about their lives in a small community where people know each other and they feel, they're going to talk about me. When it really should be the other way, that this is a small community, we can support each other. It's not a reflection of who you are as a parent or as a person. It's just that someone was in a lot of pain. And the more we can be open about that and accepting around that, the more services we can provide. And Brenda and I have been talking about possibly starting an after-suicide support group. It's needed in the area, and hopefully that's something we can provide. And I also want to mention that suicide is often, the statistics are often higher among family members. So if Uncle Jim took his life, then little Jim may in some ways see that as more of an option. And the statistics are strong on that suicides, quote, run in families, which of course they don't genetically, but somehow it's seen more as an option, which is very concerning, and that anyone with suicide in the family needs to get some support around that.
There is absolutely an increased risk of suicide among families, and that is one reason why when I do assessments with my clients, that I ask if they've had a family member that has attempted or completed suicide.
How important is it, this is one of my genuine curiosities, how important is it to not just have someone to talk to about this, but someone who shared an experience or a similar type of experience? Because you mentioned a support group. I think that's really interesting because it seems like that would be one of the necessary ways for someone who's dealt with it, either directly or indirectly, to cope and even be able to get through it, is to talk to other people who have dealt with it.
I certainly found that talking with others was the most helpful means to recovery. That others have been there, others are feeling that same kind of pain. I'm not different or unusual in my process, and that to me was far more helpful than anything else. So I think some people take to it, some don't. Some people say, I can't bear to listen to everyone else's pain. But in a way, that's part of the process. And to support others is also really helpful. It's that you can give back to others. So I think, though, that therapy as well can be extraordinarily beneficial.
The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is a huge supporter of suicide loss, and they yearly they do walks, national walks, Out of the Darkness walks around the country. They just had one in Rochester last weekend. They do one in Ithaca every year, and the one in Rochester, there was 2,000 people there on Sunday. I go every year. I missed last year, but I go because I feel that I'm not alone when I go. It gives me the feeling of, okay, I'm not the only person that has gone through this, and I'm supported. And not that I don't get support from my family and friends and whatnot, but to see it from another perspective, and it's very uplifting to be able to be in that setting.
What you guys are speaking to is going to lend really well to this. The last topic here we have to discuss is how do we go about actually eliminating the stigma. This is really, I think, where it probably starts, because this is what everyone that's come in here has said, that we need to eliminate the stigma around mental health issues, and that will begin to heal this whole process and fix things. Both of you, I'd like to get both of your perspective on this one. How do we eliminate the stigma?
Well, you may have noticed that in the language we say completed suicide rather than committed suicide. It used to always be someone commits suicide. Well, someone commits a murder, someone commits a crime. To stop looking at suicide as a crime, as something to be punished, I mean, the person is already deceased. Why would we put that stigma on their memory? So if someone has completed suicide as opposed to attempted suicide is painful enough. And again, the family may or may not have a lot of problems. Parenting may or may not have been troubled, but it is no one's fault that the other individual took their life. They took their own life for whatever reasons. So to be able to speak openly, to not be calling it something that it wasn't, and to speak about this phenomena as a societal problem.
I think that also we kind of have to look at, we go to the doctors when we have a cold, or we have a broken leg, or we have some other illness. We are completely fine with going to the doctors for that. But when it comes to our brain, our mental health, that we ignore that, or we say, oh no, I'm not crazy. We have to start looking at as it's something that is just as important as our physical health. And if we as a society can start looking at it as it's just as important as our physical health, I think the stigma will lessen. And I think that also along the lines of verbiage with the completed suicide and whatnot, I am a strong supporter in not saying a failed attempt or a successful suicide. When you talk to somebody who has attempted suicide, they don't want to hear that they failed at something else. They're already feeling like they're failing at life. They can't even successfully take their own life. That is, it just adds to the things that are not going well for them, or appears to not be going well for them.
Right, and along those lines, it's okay to ask someone if they are having suicidal thoughts.
Absolutely.
And in fact, many suicidal people are discovered to be suicidal because that question is asked, and that you're not planting the idea in their minds, you're not suggesting that they take their lives. It's actually a relief for them to be able to go, oh, somebody notices, somebody's concerned.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I really appreciate you guys coming on and talking about this. Really difficult stuff, but a really important conversation to have and to start.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for us today. Remember to check out all 4 parts of this series on FingerLakes1.com. I'd like to thank everyone who stopped in throughout this month, making the Suicide Prevention Series possible. Inside the FLX airs Sundays at 7 p.m. on Spectrum Channel 12 and is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and the FingerLakes1.com app. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.